Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Tuesday morning, February the 22nd. I'm happy to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And I'm just drinking coffee, trying to wake up here. I want to talk about what we were talking about yesterday, which is the issues of shame. And it's from a website called Hope for Us. Good information for people who have been abused or been in an abusive situation or in a relationship and might have some shame, a little bit of anger or rage and guilt or different things like that because of it. I found this information was very helpful for myself. I actually went through this. I did these shows when it was last year sometime, where I went through and did this whole section on the shame-rage connection and this whole website here, Hope for Us, and all this information. So I've already done this stuff and looked at this information. It was very helpful for me because I had a lot of rage. I still have a little bit of that left, and I'm still working through that, but a lot of it's gone because I was able to get in touch with my inner child, and that Hope for Us has some great information on there on our website regarding the inner child. And so I did a lot of inner child work. I'm still working on it. I'm still allowing I'm allowing myself to get in touch with that person who I was when I was just a kid being abused in that situation and growing up in the home I did. And so I'm still working through a lot of that, but I'm in such a better place because of this. This information I found very helpful, so I hope that you will too. And that's what we're going to talk about the rest of this week, and then we'll move on to something else next week. So yeah, that's what we'll be doing this morning. I'm not a counselor or a therapist. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own blog talk shows, and mainly just to be one more voice out here speaking out about this stuff, And there's lots and lots of people who are doing a lot of great work, and I just want to be one more voice to add to theirs. And because I find that they're very helpful, and having, the silence broken, I think is very important because abuse is very much allowed to continue because of the silence. The abusers want it silent, but they can keep abusing children, whether it's parents or whoever it is. Society wants it silenced because nobody wants to deal with it. It's very ugly and disturbing, and many times survivors can't speak out, so they're silenced. And so I just wanted to be one more voice to break the silence. And so I'm not a counselor or therapist. You have to listen at your own discretion. I'm talking about abuse, and abuse is a very sensitive subject. And so all of my shows, you have to listen at your own discretion. It is clearly your discretion to listen to what I'm talking about. So make sure you're in a safe enough place to listen, right? And that it's okay for you, and that is ultimately your decision. So you're responsible for that. Young people under the age of 18, I ask that you have permission to listen to my show. And the reason being is because there's a lot of adult content on my shows. And it's all, it's mainly about child abuse and stopping child abuse. But, young people have the right to protection. And so that's why I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. And we're fighting to save children's lives. And every day we're all volunteers. And, we're trying to make a difference in this world for children. So I want everybody under the age of 18, if you're listening, to make sure you have an adult, someone who cares about you and what you're doing online, to listen to a show and make sure it's age appropriate for you. And that would be very great. I'd appreciate that. So we'll get right into this topic here. I did pop the link into the chat room, just in case anybody's interested in taking a look at that. www.hope4survivors.com/shame.html. And this is really, I don't know, I just found this information was very helpful. I didn't understand what shame was in the first place. I had always heard people saying, shame on you, shame on your behavior, things like this. I didn't really understand that I was internalizing shame, that I had I realized that I was dealing with a whole lot of this stuff. I didn't know what it was that I was dealing with. I knew I was angry and upset about the abuse that I suffered and watched my family go through, but I just didn't know what it was. You know what I mean? I didn't know that there was an actual word or a name that we could call it. And so this particular website, this Hope for Us, is a survivor, and she's created these web pages, and most of it is work, and some of it is based on other people's work, but mainly it's John Bradshaw did a lot of work on and he's an author, and he's done a lot of work on healing the shame that binds you, different books like that, which I have not read. I'd like to read them. I haven't had a time or the money to purchase these books, but I do plan on doing that because it's really good information. Like yesterday we were talking about internalizing shame. It says if we experience toxic shame, it's difficult to recognize As Bradshaw says, a shame-based person will guard against exposing his inner self to others, but more significantly, he will guard against exposing himself to himself. And so they go through and list these different internalization of shame. It involves at least three processes. So they said the identification with shame-based models, abandonment, the legacy of broken mutuality, and that's kind of where we left off yesterday. And abandonment, that's huge. They said children find love, acceptance, and identity in the mirroring eyes of their parents or primary caregivers. And abandonment can include this lack of or loss of positive mirroring, not just physical abandonment. Besides physical desertion and lack of mirroring, abandonment includes any of the following, which is neglect, abuse of any kind, and enmeshment into the needs of the parents. And so that's what I was talking about yesterday, just going through some of my own, situation, right? Number 3, interconnection of memory imprints. As shaming experiences are recorded in a child's memory banks. And as Bradshaw explains, because the victim has no time or support to grieve the pain of the broken mutuality, his emotions are repressed and the grief is unresolved. And any future experience which even vaguely resembles the original shame-based trauma can easily trigger the words, sights, sounds, smells, or other seen or senses involved in the original trauma. As memory imprints. And then they said self-alienation and isolation. Alienation means that you experience parts of yourself that are alien to you. For example, I was shamed for crying during my childhood abuse. Therefore, feeling grief and crying became an alienated part of myself. So this is Hope for Us speaking here. She says, whenever I feel grief now, I often experience toxic shame. And this is why it is so important to learn the toxic shame that binds us to our past trauma in order to adequately process these unresolved emotions. So that's quite interesting what she said there. And I know so many people, I've even heard other parents who actually say this to their children, stop crying. You're not allowed to cry. But I know growing up we were not allowed to show any emotion, or we were not allowed to cry or to get angry about what was going on in our home, because our parents were trying to control the whole situation. And so, we were not allowed to show any feelings about the fact that we were being abused and that we were being maltreated. So if we were getting, if I took a beating from my mother, especially because she was my main abuser, if I was crying, because of course it hurts, you know what I mean? And it's upsetting to have somebody attack you, and especially when they're raging and they're kicking you and they're beating on you. I mean, it's like, of course you're going to be upset. It's very upsetting. You're panicking. You can't breathe. You're crying. A lot of times I was pleading for her to stop and, begging for mercy, really. But I wasn't necessarily saying, I beg you for mercy. I mean, I was just like, Mommy, stop. You know what I mean? And it's harsh when they tell you that if you don't stop crying, you're going to get another beating, because then you have to turn off all of your emotions in order to do that. So, in order to stop the tears from coming. So you have to shut down, basically, in order to stop crying, right? And if you don't stop crying, you're going to catch another beating. That's how I grew up. And so, pretty harsh. The parents do that to their children. I know that this is probably more common than not, because parents don't want to deal with the fact that they're hurting their children, and they want the children to think that it's perfectly okay that they're receiving this beating or whatever this abuse would be, whether it's physical, verbal, emotional, psychological abuse, or sexual abuse, right? That the child should just sit there and smile and take it and be happy. And that's what my mom said. If she'd be like, if you don't put a smile on your face right now, you're going to catch another beating. And I mean, this is after I was just beaten. So I would have to smile, literally put a smile on my face. And that is so psychologically, I was not feeling like smiling. I was not happy. I was not wanting to smile. I was wanting to cry and bawl and actually pound the floor and throw a fit, because I had been just beaten and trashed, by my mother, who I wanted so badly for her to love me, to pick me up and hold me and care for me, and to tell me these nice things, which I never heard. So, very psychologically damaging, you bet. Because then what happens later on in life, anything that goes wrong, you just learn how to smile, even though inside you're just torn up and ripped apart, and you can't even function hardly. And yet, to the outside world, you're smiling. So everything's great. I was able to do that because of what my mother did to us. And she actually didn't do that just to me. She did that to the whole family. Like, that was something that all the siblings suffered through. We were made to be okay with what our parents were doing to each other and what they were doing to us. And I think that's pretty common with people who have survived abuse, right? I mean, it's not maybe everybody's story, but I know that a lot of people have probably gone through that. Just being forced to be okay with it and smile and just go on about our lives. And, we were told like many times if my mom would actually beat me up in front of somebody's home before we were going in to visit. Like she'd slap me around and she'd like grab my hair and pull me and knock me down and slap me around. And then she'd tell me, get up and you're going to put a smile on your face and you're going to go in there and you're going to behave yourself. And I'd go in there and I'd be like wounded from this beating that she just dished out. And of course the people whose house we were going to were friends of my parents and did not care about the abuse that my parents were inflicting upon us. They just did not. They were blinded to it. They did not care. They did not care that I had bruises and marks and welts on my body or on my face, and they really didn't care, that my mom was treating me that way. They actually witnessed some of it and never stepped in on my behalf as a small child. So that's the thing, it's incredibly harsh, when you're just told this is the way you're gonna have to toe the line. And of course, to my little friends that were there in the home, the other people's kids, I'd be like, if my mom hits me one more time, I'm running away. And I believe I was under the age of 10 when I was saying stuff like that, probably about 8, 9 years old. And I didn't like the abuse I was suffering. I sure didn't. And it was very, very hard because, of course, I'd have to be smiling when I walked in the door, but inside I was raging, just absolutely raging, because I had already been taking so much abuse from these two people, and watching this whole thing my whole life. It was causing a lot of internalized anger, a lot of internalized rage, because my mom was allowed to beat me up, but I was not allowed to express my feelings. I was not allowed to express my anger or express my hurt and pain, because of the abuse that she was inflicting upon me. So it was very much internalized. And as I got older, it got worse and worse, and I became very self-destructive, doing a whole lot of drugs, really not caring if I lived or died, because that's how I got to the point where I just couldn't handle it anymore, and I really didn't care. And I was hoping that, my mom would either kill me, or eventually I was just like, I don't care. What are they going to do, kill me? Good, go for it. Put me out of my misery. And that's what that will do to, that prolonged, heavy-duty, consistent, prolonged abuse, where there's no help for the child. That's what happens. And so many people, like my brothers, 2 of my brothers killed themselves. One of them, my brothers, committed suicide, and the other one died of a drug overdose, just a slow death, many years later. But he was, they were both under the age of 40. One of my brothers killed himself at the age of 33, and my other brother died of a drug overdose at the age of 37. And they were the 2 middle brothers, and they were the 2 most abused by my dad, and some by my mom too. My mom could take them guys on, no problem. My brothers were 6 feet tall. My mom was 5'10", 5'11". She was almost 6 feet tall, and she weighed about 300 pounds, 2 pounds, and she could take my brothers on, no problem. So you can imagine what she could do to me, because I was very small, very tiny. Came in very sickly because I was born under really bad conditions. My mom was very sick, and they had to take me out early, like 2.5 months early. So I was born preemie, and then coming into this home where there was no love, no affection. The abuse was very serious at that point. That's why when I was 2, the social workers were involved, because CPS got involved because my brother went to school because he was all beat up. And I talk about this a lot, but that's because it's the truth, right? So the social workers were involved for a couple of years, for quite a while, and they were watching the family for a while. They were coming by with their clipboards and checking me out, make sure I wasn't being abused and stuff, and all the kids in the home. And, they didn't remove us, right? And that was back in the 60s, and they weren't doing a whole lot of, they still don't remove children when they should. You know what I mean? I that's what my main issue is, that, we need to fix this situation. But today we're talking about survivor stuff. But it's absolutely horrific, and have to go on like that. And then you get older as an adult, and you've never learned how to allow yourself to show these emotions. Because, see, if I cry, it takes me back to where I was before, with my mom, beating me up and then telling me, put a smile on your face right now or you're going to catch another beating. And you behave yourself and you straighten up, and and you're not allowed to show any emotions. You're not allowed to show any your true feelings. And so as an adult, it's very, very hard to allow myself to get in touch with that part of myself. So I totally understand this alienation section that they're talking about. Like, it's it's a part of us that we never allow ourselves to see, because it's very hurtful, and it's just pushed so far down, you know what I mean, that it's incredibly hard to get in touch with and to learn how to deal with. So that's what I'm doing now on my healing journey, is working through a lot of this stuff. I have Linda here with me today. Hi, Linda. How are you? I hope your day has gone well so far. So shame is a false self. This is the next section. They said, because the exposure of self to self lies at the heart of neurotic shame, escape from the self is necessary. And this is accomplished by creating a false self. So some people actually create false selves, and I don't know if I ever did really create too much of a false self. I was always kind of in touch with who I was and not really trying to be somebody else. I was just kind of being very destructive. So I don't know if I had a false self. It'd be interesting to see what a psychologist or psychiatrist would say about that. Shame is codependency. As discussed on the Nurturing Parent page, people who are codependent try to get their inner child's needs met through another adult, and or they focus all of their nurturing abilities on other adults, usually a significant other, who are trying to get these needs met through others. So people who are codependent have no inner life. They lack the ability to get their needs met from within themselves, and therefore happiness and feelings of self-validation are found outside themselves. So they're just looking for that nurturing. They're looking for something that's missing within their own life that they can't find within themselves, and so they try to get their needs met through other people. I looked back at this codependency stuff just recently, looking back on my shows, talking about this whole thing about codependency, because I had heard people say that our family was codependent, but I didn't know what it meant. And I had heard people say, "Oh yeah, Mom, she was totally codependent," and my siblings, we'd be talking. I never really knew what codependency meant, right? And so I didn't understand what it was all about. I went back and looked at it, and it's very interesting to see about this codependent stuff. Our family was completely codependent, and we were neurotic codependent, you know what I mean? Like we grew up in this abusive environment, and yet we were trying to get our needs met through each other, and absolutely toxic and neurotic. So it was very interesting to see how that worked, and it was really our parents that set this up, and our parents were unable to provide just a stable environment. They were very codependent on their children as well as not each other, because my parents hated each other. So they used their kids to meet their needs, and I talked a little bit about that yesterday. Like my dad, my parents were so abusive towards each other. It wasn't just my dad abusing my mom. My mom was also highly abusive towards my dad. It's because of what he had been doing to her for so many years. She couldn't take it anymore. He had been abusing her since the time they got married, probably since before. I don't know why she married him, but she felt it was an out and a way to get away from her mother, because my parents were born in the 1920s, and they were both abused as children. And I think my mom, when she met my dad, I think she thought, oh, here's my out. I can get away from my family. I can get away from my abusive mother, because my grandmother was a horrible woman who I absolutely have no love in my heart for at all. But, my mom was like, yeah, I just want to get away from this. So she married this man that she really didn't. She knew him because they lived pretty close by on some farms that were within the area. Their families knew each other, and they were all a bunch of twisted, sick people. And that's the truth. They're Back Hills, Nova Scotia. So if that gives you any idea, 1920, Back Hills, Nova Scotia. There you go. Education levels were pretty low, and they were very much ignorant people. And so their families knew each other, and so my mom married this man, and he turned out to be just this horrific man who would abuse my mother horrifically. You know what I mean? So my mom went to the courts in 1940s to try to get a divorce because my dad was abusing her and the kids, my older siblings, and the courts would in Canada at that point would not give her or grant her a divorce, because they said, we don't care that your husband's abusing your children or you. There's no infidelity. So if there's no unfaithfulness and your husband's not sleeping around on you, then you have to stay in the marriage. So Mom really actually filed for divorce, and they wouldn't do it. So she really felt like towards by the time the 1960s came around and I was born, the abuse was rampant, and she just felt she was stuck in the situation, and that was her life. She had been abused as a kid. She had been abused as a child, and all the way up through her life by her mother, and not her dad. Her dad, I guess, was a really decent person, my grandfather, but he should have got the kids out. I would have done something myself, but I think he was afraid of his wife, because my grandmother, because she was so horrific. She killed one of her own sons, and she was just horrific, and so I think he was afraid of her. So that's why. But he should have done a better job to protect his children, and that makes me angry. But oh well, what are you going to do? That's way too long ago, and my mom's already passed away many years ago. So, but the issue is that here's my mom trying to escape this stupid woman who abused her, and then gets into this marriage. So this is the setup for when I came along. It was already so out of control. It was out of, there was no reconciliation for my parents for their marriage. It was a mess, and so they had no intentions on separating because they were going to stay together and make each other's lives hell, which they kept saying they were. That was their main goal, was to make each other's lives hell, and they just set this mess up for us. And so our parents couldn't get any of their needs met through each other. My dad was the only sexual needs that my dad could get through my mother was to rape her, because my mom had stopped sleeping with him, especially after I was born. Because actually before I was born, two of my siblings, there were 5 children born after the doctors told my mom not to have any more children. So because my mom had already had 4 children. And on the 5th one, she almost died, and they said, okay, 5 children, that's enough. No more kids, right? So my dad repeatedly raped my mother, and she had 5 more. So only 2 of us made it out of the 5. So the other 3 were stillborn, but that's because I think my mother was trying to kill the children in the womb. I think that she was starving herself. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't taking good care of herself, because I think she was hoping that these children would die because they were all born of rape. So that would have been my brother, my sister, and myself. The last 5 really were probably born out of marital rape. So that had been going on for 7 years, 5 children born. My dad had just been repeatedly raping my mother. And he had kept continuing doing that after I was born, because the reason I know is because he raped her in front of me when I was about 5 years old, and I remember the horrific scene. And so it makes me sick, and my brothers would try to save my mom. Many of the beatings that my brothers took were because my dad was trying to force himself on my mother, and my older brothers would go to try to save her and get him away from her, and then they would be beaten. So my dad would beat them up. So that was one of the main reasons why there was such a huge issue in the family with abuse and violence, is because my dad didn't care that my mother couldn't have any more children, and would not let her get on birth control, and didn't care about her life. He just cared about his own needs, his own sexual needs. And so I think that I don't have any proof of this, but I think he sexually used my brothers, or at least one of them. And I'm so serious about this. And I actually used to think it was my dad that actually sexually abused me, because it just seemed to me that he was so evil. Well, he was evil, but I never wanted to think that it would be one of my brothers that would sexually use me. But now that when I think about it, I know it was one of my brothers, because I know it was a younger person and they had long hair, and my brothers had long hair. And in the back of my mind, I know it's my brother. And not only that, my brother actually said a few things that actually put it into place for me, because he said that he used to like to touch me, and I was in a sexual way. He said not a baby soft way. He says in a sexual way. And he used to kill himself, and so he would be. One time I talked to him on the phone while he had slit his wrist, because he was in Canada, and he called my mom to tell him that he was committing suicide. Stuff. So my mom put me on the phone with him so she could go across to the neighbors to make a phone call to get the police alerted to go and get my brother some help right up in Canada. So I was talking to my bro during this period of time where my mom went across the street to make this phone call. This was back in the days before the cell phones, and my brother was telling me all this stuff that he liked me sexually. See, and I know it was him. It really shocked me, because I was how old was I at the time? 13 years old. Around 13. And I couldn't believe that I heard that, because I always thought it was my dad that had sexually abused me, and I wanted to believe that it was my dad that did that, because my dad was a bit of a ogler. He used to like to walk in on me when I was having a shower or a bath or whatever, and he would stand there and he would just ogle, he wouldn't leave the room, and I'd be yelling, "Get out, get out." And he would just sit there and he would just look. He was a perverted man, and so I thought for sure that it was him that abused me sexually, and when I was 8 years old. And then thinking about it now, it is more likely that it was my brother. But I think that my dad sexually used some of my brothers, and I'm not sure how many, but they would never come forward and say anything, and now they're almost all dead. One of my brothers was murdered at the age of 19, and the other 2 are gone, one drug overdose and one suicide. And then my other brother's still living, and would he ever say anything? Or if he was abused sexually by my dad, would he ever come forward with it? I doubt it. he's very much in denial. As much as he likes to say that the family was all screwed up and that my parents were a mess, and he says I had a different life than you guys did, and we were treated better than you guys, and we didn't. He was one of the oldest siblings, but I don't believe that at all, because my mom actually went to court to try to divorce my dad because of the abuse that my dad was inflicting on my brother and sister, the two oldest siblings, when my mom and dad were just newly married there and had a couple of kids. And so, my brother basically just likes to pretend that nothing happened to him. It was all the rest of the siblings, right? And so, I don't know. It's his own way of dealing with it, I guess. But yeah, our parents were very codependent as far as that on the children, because they were trying to get their needs met through their children. Like, my mom didn't want to talk to my dad and didn't want to have anything to do with my dad. She would get, her sons to protect her and to do things for her, like, to be the partner, basically. I don't think my mom was sexually using my brothers. I really don't think that's the case at all. I think that she was just wanting them to be her protector and, to be to help her out. And so she did that to me because I was the last born, and after all the siblings left the home or died or whatever, then I became that protector, So she never, my parents, as far as I know, I don't know if my dad sexually abused me or not. I'd have to get in touch with that stuff, but I know my mom didn't, right? My mom was very physically abusive and emotionally, psychologically, abusive, verbally abusive, majorly verbally abusive, but, she was using me to be her protector after the other siblings all left or moved out or got married or whatever. And so that's a hugely codependent family that would, that does stuff like that. And my there's not very many of us left. There's only a couple of us left, and are we still codependent? Not really, because I don't have anything to do with my family anymore. I cut them off last year. But the thing is that the rest of them, I think they are very much still codependent, and it's unfortunate because they don't have. My brother, actually, I don't think he's got his own life. He doesn't worry about. He just does his own thing. He's married and he's happily married. And my sister, on the other hand, is very codependent. She needs. Even if it's abusive, she needs to have her needs met through others. She can't meet her own needs, so she can't be happy in this life ever, because she's always looking for somebody to meet her needs within this dysfunctional family. And this dysfunctional family, we're trying to get your needs met so that to bring happiness into your life. And in this abusive, dysfunctional family we grew up in, it's never going to happen. And for her to continue, my dad's like 90 years old and almost dead. She's still looking for that within the family. And I told her a long time ago, I was like, man, if you need to get some friends. You need to do something with your life. Get busy and do something for yourself, with yourself, by yourself, and stop looking for other people to meet your needs. Because I had already recognized this a long time ago, but I just didn't know what codependent meant. So codependency is a huge issue, I think, for so many people who have been grown up in dysfunctional homes and who have, experienced abuse and whatnot, parents, people who are codependent themselves. It's huge. It's really interesting to take a look at what it actually is and how much it will affect your life. I know I did a whole lot of work on it and really realized that I was doing some of it, And this next portion of this article, shame is borderline personality. Many psychiatrists today see many types of mental illness as rooted in neurotic shame. Borderline personality involves self-image disturbance, difficulty identifying and expressing one's own thoughts, and difficulty with self-assertion. They talk about shame as the core and fuel of all addiction. So this is what we'll look at tomorrow. So hopefully you can check this out, www.hopeforsurvivors.com. That's for Hope for Us, has written these web pages, and I hope you will check them out, www.hopeforsurvivors.com/shame.html. So thanks, everybody, for being here. I appreciate it. Have a good day, and make sure you take care of yourselves, I'm telling you, I said it on almost every show, you make sure you get some help, well, no matter what help that is, counseling, therapist, a friend, calling crisis line, whatever you have to do. But you make sure if you can't reach somebody and you can't get a hold of a friend or your counselor or therapist, you call a crisis line. You know what I mean? If you're having a hard time, right? Never, ever give up. Not ever, right? We certainly deserve to have a good life. And so do whatever it takes, because as adults, we are responsible for this. We're responsible for our adult lives as adults, right? And so, we need to be in charge of our road to healing. And, it's literally up to us. And so when I figured that out 4 years ago, I got really busy and started to realize, hey, it's going to have to be me to do this. No one else can do this for me. And so, I'm going to have to face this stuff. And so, it's been great because I no longer, want to kill myself. I no longer want to end my life. I no longer want to self-injure because I made a commitment to live and to have a good life. And so, it's the difference between where I was 4 years ago and today is like night and day, But that's because I made a real commitment to allow myself to have a good life and treat myself well, take care of myself, and to want to live and fight to live. Most people are, that comes naturally to them, to live and to know how to face the day. And to many of us survivors, it's a real challenge just to want to stay alive, right? So make sure that you never, ever give up. My brothers gave up, and I wish that they would have fought to stick around because my brothers let my parents win this fight. And, I talk a lot about that on my shows because my parents wanted us dead, many times. And they used to tell us they wish we were dead, and they never wanted us, and they hated our guts, and they wish we had never been born, and the most horrific things, and they meant it. They weren't saying it just because they were mad. They meant it. And so I'm like, no, my life counts. I do count. And so I'm like, if I kill myself, basically what I'm doing is just finishing the job for my parents, and that's what I was trying to do my whole life until the age of 41. And so now I'm fighting to stay alive. I'm actually having a great time staying alive because I'm like, haha, what a slap in the face. They couldn't kill me. And so, they killed my two brothers, and, but they couldn't kill me. And that's my fight. That's what I'm here. I'm here to say, look, don't allow your abusers to win this fight. You stay alive, and you have a good life, and it's a slap in the face to them because it's like, haha, I'm going to have a great life. And shame on you. The shame actually belongs to them, not us, right? Have a great day, everybody. Take good care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you tonight.